work on making the climate and nature movement and global justice easier to understand, more accessible. You know, there's room for everyone. It affects everyone. Let's get involved. Katie.
Hello. Hi. Yes, perfect. Hi, my name is Kate. I am the ex-organiser of COP26 festival at University of East Anglia last year, and at the moment I work as the social and anti-war activist because I'm from Russia. So this year all my occupation has been pretty much taken over by the war in Ukraine. My kind of main and primary research interests and work within activism involves the correlation between military conflict and its influence on climate change. So this is what we're also going to talk about today. So yeah, that's pretty much me. Amit?
Hi guys, can you hear me okay? So yeah, my name is Amit, and also, surprisingly enough, a climate justice organizer. Very original, I know. But I work primarily in the health aspect of things. I'm a medical student, so a lot of my work goes towards organizing for a health perspective around climate justice. That means one of the main projects that I work on is Health for a Green New Deal. I'll talk a bit more about that as we go along as well, but what it sounds like basically. Besides that, I do some work with the People's Health Hearing Collective, calling upon creating a space from the global north to actually hear from the global south on their experiences and giving space and I guess carrying the weight of that pain basically, so they don't have to hold that space themselves basically, as a part of a much broader aspect of work that I'll again talk about a bit later.
Amazing. So yeah, as you can tell, we have some amazing people here and beautiful brains will be sharing their knowledge. So yeah, climate change. It's a big thing. You think about it. You think about the planet warming, etc. But oftentimes people don't go into the root cause of that and how it's actually similar to the cause of basically every social justice issue that we face, capitalism. So Meg, if you'd like to speak a bit more about that.
Let's do this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, we've talked about this idea of, Amit mentioned the global north and the global south, and what we mean by that is, you know, areas of power like the UK, the US, Europe, areas of political power. You might have heard of them as described as, you know, developed countries and things like that. We need to think about where that development came from. The answer is it came through the colonial exploitation of other countries. And this is really important to climate change and to climate justice because many of the root causes of climate change are the colonial actions of colonizing countries. So if you think about climate change as, you know, it is a global problem, we know that, but the route at which or the speed and intensity at which it affects people is incredibly different based on who you are, where you live. There's the example of, in London, black and brown youths are far more likely to have issues with air pollution, leading to long-term health conditions than any other group. And that's because if you are poorer because of social constructs, because of a history of colonial violence, you're going to live in the areas that other people don't want to live in because that's where you can afford. Those are the most polluted areas. So there's a brilliant quote from the Resilience Project, I believe, that says, that, you know, the thing that people don't see is that communities of color globally are always hit the hardest by climate change. And then that's exacerbated by other social issues. And, you know, we talk about intersectional justice as this idea of trans indigenous youth have so many, you know, pressures upon them and so many threats to them as trans people, as two-spirit people, on top of the effects of climate change impacting indigenous ways of living. So it's a really complicated issue, but you have to look at the root causes and think about this in a historical context. You know, why is there such inequality in how we experience climate change? Why are we so comfortable in the UK? Partly it's because of where we are in the world. Partly it's because of what we've taken from everyone else, and that needs to be addressed, whether that's through reparations, or it should be through reparations, through international solidarity, through, as Amit very rightly said, not just making space for people to come and talk, but actually enabling and saying, you know, we are in a position of power for all the wrong reasons. You know, we have a hypocritical government that drives climate policy in the West, despite not acting on any of it, again, for all the wrong reasons. So it's about having a global conversation in which we sit down, shut up and listen, basically. Is a very succinct way of putting it, but yeah, so I just think it's really important to preface all of our conversation with the fact that this is, we're talking about hundreds of years of violence perpetrated by colonizing countries when we talk about climate change.
Absolutely, incredibly important message there. And Amit, did you want to follow on about international solidarity?
Yeah, 100%. I think Meg stole my lines about the health argument, which is very tactical. No, I'm joking. I was not going to talk about air pollution. I am purely joking there. Meg made some really powerful points there, right? We have to look at our position in the world right now. And it's very complicated, right? Because a lot of us are sitting here in the working class as well. So looking at both the aspects around the power that we hold, the power that we do not hold, and looking at that solidarity from a broader perspective there. So my work goes a lot of it goes towards the Green New Deal. And I'll talk about the details of the Green New Deal later, but simply put, we're looking at an economic transition that's good for the planet, right? A Green New Deal does not just mean happening in the UK, that means wealth redistribution across the globe. And by redistribution, if you go any further than that, we're talking about reparations, right? The countries that Meg just mentioned, they've had so much exploitation happen, so much damage in both financial ways, as well as emotional, land justice as well, like the agriculture is completely ruined, soil damage, soil degradation, stuff like that, right? So we're looking at reparations through rebuilding society how it should have been if we hadn't, well, I say we, if they hadn't destroyed it, if the governments of the Western world hadn't destroyed it, if neo-capitalists like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos hadn't destroyed it, that kind of stuff is what we're really looking at there. So when we look at that, we also have to look at what campaigns are going on outside of the UK, right? A lot of my work goes in the UK, happening in the UK, but just look at what's happening outside of the UK. One of the amazing movements is Stop EACOP. Check them out. Amazing work, right? And to look at how we can build solidarity with those movements, because no matter how much work we do here, it's not enough until the global issue is solved. And that's what justice is about, right? It's not just stopping climate change where it is now. We're talking about ecological justice in a much broader term. I've got a good friend of mine who basically describes health in climate change as saying any type of oppression or injustice will be shown through your body one day. And that applies here, right? Looking back at what you were saying about two-spirited people, looking back at indigenous people, and basically lots of other communities in the global south who have not been given the chance to even recognize that they may be indigenous or may hold a different position with a lot of history behind them as well. Giving them that space and recognizing that the way health impacts come out of their body, whether it's mental health, it's physical health, it's linked to everything else going on around us, right? So I said at the start of this point as well that we're talking about having solidarity with not just the international space, but with the local and national space with the working class as well. There's a really cool movement going on called the Right to Roam, which I thought you'd be I thought you'd be excited about that. The amazing stuff that they do basically is, from the way I look at things is, you get to go out there and you get to re-establish yourself with nature, and you get to rebuild your health from a nature perspective, because we do not exist as individual people with individual health, right? Like, my health depends on the people on this panel. The way I talk to people, when we have a drink together, we complain about all this shit together, right? That's basically how we build our health. And we also talk about the joy around that as well, and how we are building a movement. We are building a world that is much better, and we're living in it as well when we have that drink, right? We're not just thinking about it, we are existing in that space, we are gaining energy in that space, and that also, most importantly, includes when you go for a walk in the spaces in which you do belong, right? You do have a connection with that nature. So I went a bit off tangent there, but please do.
Sorry, I'll be really quick. If you don't know about the right to roam, it's basically the idea that, so this is a true statistic, over 90% of the UK is private land. It's almost, I think, 93 to 96% of the UK we are not allowed to go into because it's privately owned. Rivers, 97% of Britain's rivers are privately owned. You can't go into your local river where you grew up necessarily legally. You could be considered as a trespasser. Well, you will be considered as a trespasser. So basically, right to roam is a anti-trespass. So a pro-trespass movement. They do like organised walks where basically people are like, we're going to go to that big bit of woodland that nobody uses, that's behind a wall, and we're going to go and have a walk around and exist here. And that's a crime, but it shouldn't be. They're a super cool organisation and they're picking up sort of speed a lot. You know, I think that's part of the reason why a lot of us feel so disconnected from nature, is because we are, not necessarily through our own fault. You know, it wasn't a choice, it's just what happened. There's so much beautiful green space around us and in this country, but not if we're not allowed in. But yeah, right to roam, very cool. I'm done now.
Thank you for that wonderful addition, Meg. And thank you, Amit. So many incredible points mentioned there, especially about reparations and loss and damage. And we'll come on to that soon with the next UN conference coming up, and the fact that last year the loss and damage conversations were cut very short. So essentially, jargon busting, loss and damage is countries that have emitted the most historically, giving reparations to countries that have done the least but are facing the worst effects. So it's like the responsibility of the rich countries that have caused the pollution that's affecting, you know, the countries in the global south to like actually do something and not just be like, oh, we're really green because we're net zero right now, but the countries that our emissions in the past are impacting don't have the means to become more green. So that's something super important that the UN likes to neglect, but we'll move on to that in a bit. Katie, did you want to talk a bit about your work in terms of military conflict?
Yeah, so I think I'm kind of here to also give the context in terms of how military conflict, military sponsoring and everything is related to the consequences of climate change. So just as everyone was talking here, it is very clear that the world is incredibly interconnected right now. Absolutely everything is globalized. Absolutely every single action, every single war, every single conflict is going to affect the rest of the world. So obviously my focus is on the war in Ukraine, and of course when you see the consequences of the Russian blockage of the grain supply to the world chain by Ukraine, you can see that 20 million tons of grain have not been delivered to the countries of Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Asia. So it really is the question of how do we affect the rest of the world through our economies. So it all ties back into the capitalism, into imperialism, into neocolonialism and everything, be it Russian expansionism, be it the American expansionism, be it British expansionism, be it the sweatshops that we have in Vietnam right now and in the poorer countries where we exploit people who are working for the corporations based in the northern countries and based in the richest countries. So again, as Meg was just saying, you know, these countries can claim that, oh, we're not emitting as much as China does, for example. However, we do come to those countries which are poorer, and then we blame them for the situation that they have caused in there because of the economic policies there. You know, it's all the twisted information that's being given to us, and it's all related to this. And so military specifically is a very, very dodgy and very avoiding kind of industry in a sense of how they basically really report about the emissions that they cause, regardless of whether it's the actual military conflict or it's the peaceful time. Even in the US right now, for example, let me just find my statistics, which I wrote down and I can't find them. I have so much information here. Basically, even right now in the US, there is the unrecorded amount of emissions that being released from the building of bombs, of rockets, of all the military equipment, of the supply and chain of all the armies and everything that is being sponsored by the governments themselves. So we can't even blame corporations here, because the corporations profit from the government's action, where government sponsored these armies and the military development and everything. And so there is this constant Cold War going on, where we're trying to compete with other countries in terms of our military and then present it as something that we have to be proud of. And media is a very helpful source of that as well, which is going to talk about later. It is really dangerous to think about it, because we don't know enough about how much military industry is contributing to climate change. And it's really scary to think about it, considering how much people are losing and how much people are dying right now, this second, during wars, and how much people are going to die in the future because of the economic consequences of these wars. So whether it is America, whether it is Russia, we have to address this situation, which affects the rest of the world as well, because of the globalized situation within our economies. And again, within the capitalist regimes and within the situations of our supply chains and everything, again, it is not possible to solve climate whilst we have that type of system, because every single country depends on each other right now, and every single northern country is profiting from every single southern country because of the exploitation of their resources and of their labor. So that's kind of, I think, the main take that I wanted to bring on that.
Yeah, go for it.
That was amazing. I am still in awe. And yeah, just building off of that, like from my angle, from the health perspective, we do see the military impacts in the range of emissions and climate degradation in so many different ways, right? If you go to Palestine, you will see the amount of the impact on water, right? People can't drink clean water. There's so much sanitary issues going on. That obviously also means that you can't grow crops as easily, right? You can't eat. Forget drink. You can't even eat. You can't go through different processes. You can't wash. These are basic human rights, right? And these are things that make you feel human. So it's not just, again, health is obviously about these medical conditions that we define, but it's also about how you feel within yourself. And you don't get to feel healthy or safe or comfortable the way you should do. Kurdistan, you look over there, they're burning villages, right? That is military missions for all I care. That is direct violence by governments on the Kurdish people, split up across all different states, because that was their whole strategy. We can go about abolishing borders later if we need to. And linking it back to what we're doing here, who we are here as well. Theresa May, her husband, his main focus was working, or is rather, selling military arms, right? He runs one of the largest businesses to advise on how to sell military arms to countries that are fighting one another. So this is very much an issue of the UK, and an issue that us, as not only voters, but as a public who have power in more than just a vote every 4 years, have a role in fighting against.
And just to quickly add another thing. Just to add another kind of information about what we've been talking about earlier. So instead of, trying to kind of find the ways in which we could help the global south, as Amit was and Meg were talking about it before, right now the countries are really increasing the investment into the military borders in all the northern countries, because they realize that actually actions of the corporate fossil fuels emissions and everything is going to influence the situation within the refugee crisis much larger in the future. So instead of trying to change the situation where we actually try to save our planet and actually help the countries which are going to suffer from all the consequences of climate change and going to try and flee to the countries where it's safe, the governments are now supplying the borders with much more investment so that people cannot come through the country, and it's all going to be, again, related to military conflict. Again, it's going to be the suffering of people. People are not going to be let into these countries because they don't want to change these things the way they are right now. It makes me really aggravated, but it's just, that's the situation right now. And if you want, I can give you sources on all of that information, everything, all the statistics, all of the investment numbers, figures, everything. It is on the internet, it is available, but media doesn't want to talk about it because this is not profitable, is it? So that's just one other aspect of it. So yeah, thank you.
Did she stutter? No. Yeah, I feel like a line that Kate said, that we can't solve the climate crisis under capitalism, really leads on to what I wanted to talk about. So COP, the Conference of Parties, it's the big annual UN conference where all the countries come together and they make new pledges for climate. The kind of most flagship thing was the Paris Agreement that happened in 2015. This year it's happening in Egypt. And can you guess who the sponsor is? The world's biggest plastic polluter, Coca-Cola. Yeah. So this conference, whose aim is to solve the climate crisis, is being sponsored and funded by one of the biggest companies that has caused said crisis. So, I mean, I'll let you add 2 and 2 together. Do you think any meaningful solutions are going to come from that? It's sad. I heard this news and I was like, are you kidding? Like, are you actually kidding? Because you hear like Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, saying things, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, I agree. He's like standing with the youth. He's saying, what you guys are doing is great. We need more action. COP26, the last one, was a failure, not enough action. And then he's just let this happen. And it's like, can you believe anything a politician says? So yeah, I guess just talking about that and the major greenwashing that goes on at any kind of climate or government event. Like we had the conference in the UK last year in Glasgow. Everything was branded around how we're a leading country in terms of climate action. But I don't know if you're aware, but 3 new oil and gas fields have been approved by the UK government in the past year. And that's just kind of letting slide. But yeah, we're leading on climate action, apparently.
Hello, I'll keep it quick. To add on, talking about COP and these government spaces and also everything that we're talking about, I realise it sounds incredibly doom and gloom. To be honest, it kind of is. But on the flip side of that doesn't mean, I'm sorry, I'm just going to be real with you. On the flip side, it is doom and gloom now, but that doesn't mean that we can't do anything as people, and that doesn't mean that we don't have power. So yeah, collective action. We'll talk about that later as well. But so one of the things that me and Francis, we live together. We've been talking a lot about going to COP this year because, it's in Egypt, which does not have the best environmental policies, let's be real. I'm debating if I'm too gay to go, to be honest. I'm debating I've been informed that I need to look feminine but not booby, which is hard for me. But I also can't look too mask. So it's working out how we as activists and we as young people and queer young people, for example, how can we go into these spaces and make sure that we're not tokenized or make sure that we're not ignored? And I mean, you, Amit, straight up sort of cornered a major politician at the last COP and was like, you, why aren't you doing anything? I'm massively simplifying the situation there, but it can feel very frustrating being in these incredibly corporate spaces like COP26. There were more representatives from fossil fuel companies than there were from any other country. That's insane. If you look at the UK talking about being a leader in, for example, clean energy, and then our new, who shall not be named, our new Prime Minister approving and supporting fracking as a way to solve the cost of living crisis that has been created because we won't tax corporations. They don't want to tax corporations. It's been the biggest year in profits for fossil fuel companies on record, and yet that cost is coming onto us, and especially us as young people and students, people without savings, people without houses. It's a scary time. It doesn't have to be like this, and we will talk about that more later, but I think the thing that I want to impress is that there is value and there is importance in us going into these corporate spaces and just being ourselves, going into these governmental spaces and saying, hey, I don't know if you've ever talked to a young person before, but why don't you listen? And sometimes you have really valuable conversations through that. And it's that sense of, I don't want to be in this space. I want to be with my friends. I want to be out protesting. But I realized that I'm not in the building. I'm outside the building shouting at it. So what can I do to be a bridge in those spaces? You know, if we're, for example, I did a lot of work at the last COP with If Not Us Then Who, which is a filmmaking collective for Indigenous youth based in largely in South America. And we... It was one of those things of like, you know, I'm in a stupid private party with like Leonardo DiCaprio and the artist for Fabergé, and it's like we're eating tiny small plates, and I'm like, this is the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Oh, have you heard about this filmmaking collective? And so taking the stories of the people that you care about and the causes you care about into spaces where they wouldn't otherwise be heard. It's a frustrating position to be in, but it's necessary. So, yeah, sorry, I've realised I've rambled.
No, very amazing. Thank you for sharing. I just want to add to that. We're all like adding on top of each other's things because we just have so much to say. But in terms of like forcing people in power to hear things, I have some incredible friends who've done incredible things. I just want to talk about it a little bit. So my friend Lauren went into a Shell conference and sat in front of the CEO of Shell and told him that basically what he's doing is ruining people's lives and sharing stories of people from the front lines. And he didn't like that very much. But they wrote like an official response and stuff. It definitely got things shaking up. The other day, my friend Michaela went into the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation conference and led with, I don't think billionaires should exist. Yeah, so young people are coming into these spaces and claiming them and making their voice heard, because things like writing emails, petitions, etc. aren't always the most helpful. So sometimes you have to pretend that you agree with what they're doing and then get there and be like, actually, no.
It's the idea, I don't know if you've seen the meme of the duck holding a knife and it says, I think I will cause problems on purpose. Yeah. It was, Michaela really, accepted this invite, like, yeah, I'd love to talk. And it's tokenistic. You know when you're invited that they just want to use you as a face of like, wow, look at how diverse we are, look at how green we are. So then to go in and to say, hey, Bill Gates Foundation, you're built on corruption. It's like, it's amazing. And if you can get TV coverage there, if you can get people there filming it in a way that it can't be edited, that's the big one. Live footage is awesome. It's your best friend. Anyway, big ups Michaela, it was very cool.
Yeah, and if you guys want to watch either of those confrontations, it's Lauren McDonald and Michaela Loach. You can just Google it, they'll come up. Amit, it's been a bit doom and gloom. Should we talk a bit more about solutions? So obviously you do work in the Green New Deal. Do you want to enlighten us about that?
I'd be more than glad to.
You sound it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about everything that's been said, and I think I just want to link there as well to the Green New Deal point as well. Lauren, whenever I talk to them, they always talk about how they did that, but they don't want to be considered a hero for doing that. They don't want to be tokenized by their own people as somebody to look up to and be different to everyone sitting here, right? And I feel the same way. Like, obviously, there's this big barrier between us all, but we are still talking to one another. And I think that's the reality of it, that we all can do this stuff. We all have to get involved in doing this stuff. And that's how change happens. We talk about not having enough capacity. Rich people have much more money than we do. It's in the name. But we have people power. We have a totally different resource that they rely upon and they need from us. And we hold that card and we need to use that card. Speaking of cards to use, back in the 70s, 80s time, Exxon, which is one of the big polluters, they warned the world about people playing the health card. So I'm going to play the health card. And like I said before, health is so inherent to us that you see it coming out in the way we exist in our bodies in every single way, right? Like I said to people who weren't there beforehand, whether it's you coughing or you having an infection or whatever, or it's that feeling of discomfort due to the injustice that you're not just seeing but existing within every single day. You walk down the street and there's some kind of discomfort, right? It can be anything in that whole range, but there are ways to solve that. And the way that I work towards it is a global Green New Deal. Underline the word global, because like I said before, a Green New Deal cannot exist only in the UK, because that's still relying on the backs of all the oppression, the pain, the suffering, the slavery, the damage that's occurred in the global south. This Green New Deal must be global, must be rooted in wealth redistribution, and it must be rooted in collective action where we all come up together fairly and evenly. But what is a Green New Deal? A Green New Deal obviously looks at all the logistical stuff around climate change, reducing CO2 output so that it is a real zero, not a net zero, but a real zero. We don't want to have any true carbon output, right? Because these net zero solutions are rooted in innovation and ideas that don't exist. We haven't got those solutions yet. They keep saying we're going to find them, but where from, right? They just don't exist. So we need to find a real zero solution to this. And in doing that, we need to have a system of justice, a system where you've got access to fair, well-paid jobs for all people, including current oil workers. Importantly, people who work in the oil industry, because they are also supporting their family, right? These are people of working class backgrounds who need to take care of their family and are often tied by society around them. So creating a space for them to exit out of that space, which is also oppressing the workers within the oil industry. So we're talking about a Green Deal there. And we're talking about, again, the international solidarity being bringing out the money that we have in the UK and putting that back in renewable systems globally. We're looking at fair trade. We're looking at abolishing borders. And just getting rid of these colonial systems, because don't forget, when I say abolishing borders, those borders were drawn by a ruler, by a white man's hands, right? In some dark room with 10 other rich white men surrounding that person. So yeah, destroy those borders. Fuck them up. You know. But yeah, the health aspect for it is just. Let's talk about, for example, let's talk about transport, right? We want to have better transport. We need to get rid of these cars on the streets. We want to bring in buses. We want to bring in pedestrian areas. We want to bring in cyclist lanes and stuff like that. What that really means is when you go for a walk, you get to go for a walk with your friend, right? When you go for a walk, you get to bump into somebody and say hi to them. When you go for a walk, you get to pop down at the local cafe, grab a coffee, run off to work. Whatever that might mean to you, that means collectivism. That means existing in a world that is interactive, that is human, which we're not allowed to do in this capitalist system where we're just running, working, right? Existing in a space where you get to look after your own health and look after each other's health, because, like I said before, our health is not individual. My health relies on the other people around me. We've all seen people, when someone else is upset, you get upset, right? When someone else is happy, you become happy. So that's what a Green New Deal really is. It's not just limited to these policy systems. It's also rooted in that liberation, quite frankly. It's rooted in that access to a world that is caring, that is wonderful, that is joyful. People might be wondering here, yeah, I want to get involved with that, but it's so, like Meg said, it's so doom and gloom. It's just really sad what we're hearing right now. So how do we get away from that? And the way we get away from that is finding different outlets for each person. But for me, it has been organizing, right? When I talk to people, we're not just in meetings, obviously, we're discussing how do we do this. Then we have a drink, we go for a party, you know, we just have a rant together, we have a laugh together, and we live in a different world in that time where we are in that world we want to be in. We choose to go for walks when we're not allowed to go for walks because of the time constraints the world puts on us. We choose to just, have a laugh with the local band that's come down, you know. That kind of interaction is basically where it's rooted in. You can find your own things, right? You can love music, you can love sports, you can love whatever it might be. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is, just existing in a protest. is one of the most liberating, wonderful, exciting feelings ever, right? Like, there's just something freeing about knowing the people around me don't want to hurt me, and they care about me, and I care about them, and I'm not in danger for being a brown man in a white world, because these people understand. They might not understand it truly, but they want to show solidarity there, and I want to show solidarity with them in the same way. So I think finding those spaces for yourself, if you don't know where they are, reach out to us. We'll be around afterwards. Ask us. We'll, but yeah, get involved. Find that thing that makes you happy, that makes you joyful, that gives you the energy to keep on fighting the system, because that's what it's rooted in. We can't stop.
Absolutely. And I think finding joy in fighting for social change is such a key thing, and that's something that I really focus on with my work. And also engaging more people. So a lot of people might not go to a climate protest, might feel a bit intimidated by that, and think like, oh, I'm not perfect, I'm not vegan, I have a car, I can't possibly be involved in this. And something that's really important to stress is that we're not perfect either. Like, I'm not vegan, I get a taxi sometimes, it's okay, no one's perfect. And to take action and to use your voice, you don't have to be, because the system that we're living in makes it hard to be sustainable. That's why we're trying to change it. So please don't think like, I eat meat so I can't do it, I'd be a hypocrite. It's okay. I mean, you have Billie Eilish talking about climate change, and she's flying around the world on tour. Like, you are in a system that makes it impossible to be the perfect activist. Like, it's a silly concept. It doesn't exist. Yeah. And so what Amit does is kind of focusing on the campaign side of thing and physical policy change. And what I focus on is more platforming that stuff and getting more people involved. So organising concerts, getting musicians involved, using their platforms, so you get people along who wouldn't go on the streets to join a protest, but they see that Declan McKenna's doing something, so they'll come along. And then he talks about climate, and we talk about our thing, and then they get involved. And it's just a good way. We have 3 minutes left. Of engaging people, and I really saw that this summer when we took our big bright pink bus to festivals with music on the top, rocked up at the most unusual of places for climate messaging, like Wireless, for example, and it actually went down quite well. Like, people were down with it. It was in a space where you wouldn't usually have that, and it was a message just showing people that we are young people as climate activists. We're not all super turned on making speeches, screaming in the streets all the time, and there's so many different methods to achieve climate justice. And it's got to be joyful, because we can't just live in a pit of anxiety all the time, because that's not productive. It's not going to solve anything if we're all scared all the time. So yeah, I just wanted to put out there that there's lots of different methods, loads and loads and loads of different climate groups to get involved with. And please don't hesitate speaking to any of us if you have a particular interest or a particular skill. You guys are creative humans, things like film, things like social media, video, graphics, etc. are all so needed in the climate space. It's not just coming and speaking on a panel or being confident in public speaking. You don't need to be good at public speaking to be an activist. The number of people have had to tell this, and they're massively involved in the movement now. So in terms of staying hopeful, do any of you guys have something to add? Meg does.
Hello, I'm going to keep it really short. We're going to do a Q&A, but I don't think we have time, and there's going to be another talk on. Oh, we have time for a couple of questions. If not, we'll be bopping about anyway, so you can come just chat to us or find us on social media, and we will answer all your questions. So to talk about staying hopeful, Amit's mentioned this, because actually this concept, when someone says, they just drop a sentence in and you're Amit said in an interview, he was like, we were doing this radio interview together, and he said, you know, we're making the world that we want to live in, and we're living in the world that we're making. And my head just went kaboom, like that's crazy, but it's true, and that is what is so important, because you'll meet so many people who've tried to be involved in activism or have been to climate protests. Maybe you guys did school strikes. And then you get this, it's called eco-anxiety. You know, 70% of young people are suffering from eco-anxiety. That's the recorded figure. I'd say it's a lot higher. You know, we're scared for our futures. We're scared for our friends internationally. It's a scary time to be alive. One thing that we can do is look at this concept of active hope. So active hope doesn't mean being active. It doesn't even mean being hopeful. It just means looking at this situation and thinking, you know, why do I feel like this? I'm not crazy. This situation is crazy. What can I do? Whatever makes me feel good, you know. And in the long term, being like, fuck it, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand and not deal with this, it's not a long-term solution, you know. I always say as well, if you don't think you're an activist, if you do your recycling, that's an act. You're an activist. If you build an insect hotel in your garden, that's an act. You're an activist. I feel really strongly about this. When people are like, oh yeah, I'm not an activist, but yeah, I have like an allotment. I'm like, you're a fucking activist. Like, so when we talk about this idea of being a perfect activist, it just doesn't exist. There will be people who will say, you know, you're not for the cause if you're not going to get arrested. And it's like, that's not a long-term solution. That is a narrative of urgency that, you know, it's not planning further than the next couple of years. Like, for example, for one of my jobs, I have to have a CRB check because I work with children. If I'm arrested, I can't have that. You know, if I face jail time, I can't have that. Also, I have OCD and a busy brain, and being in a little box is not going to be good for me. My partner had to sit me down and was like, you would hate being arrested. I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. God damn. Like, you know, but the narrative is that that's what you have to do. No, it's not. Exactly what Francis said. One thing about scientists, they're amazing at science. They're not necessarily the best at talking to people or communicating. That's why I went into eco-communication. I can't count, so I'm bad at science, but I'm good at talking and I'm good at writing. There are so many avenues into conservation. There are so many avenues into working in the climate and nature crisis. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to know everything. None of us know everything. That's the thing. We're all learning. You know, I've learned terms. I didn't know what loss and damage meant. I know now. You know, that is a really key part of this, is learning together and being together and building solidarity and community. Like, we met through climate activism at home near Bristol. And then, you know, then Francis was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I'm thinking about coming to UEA. And I was like, please come to UEA. And here we are now, you know. So it's especially with Climate Live, it's a brilliant movement. It's a brilliant way to get involved. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Lovely. So we have a couple of minutes, so probably the time for one, maybe two questions. Does anything? Go for it. Yeah, absolutely. So many things. I think a key thing that's overlooked is using your voice and, you know, speaking about these causes, using your like social media platforms to platform things. There's things like Climate Live that you can get involved with, perform at, like hit me up. If you want to know more about the technical things of like touring and how to make your tour more sustainable, or like your shows, looking at Music Declares Emergency or Vision 2025, they have a lot of resources specifically for musicians that you can have a look at. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Well, I think that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for coming and listening.
Thank you also to Ben for having us. Thank you to our paths for doing this, for making it free. We love to see it. And also for getting us together, because it's been a while. So yeah, big love to the panelists, big love to you guys, big love to Wild Paths, and to Access for having us as well. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just end with one statement, which is, you were asking how to have hope and where you get hope from, and I'm seeing people nodding in the crowd right now, and to me that's hope, right? Like that does bring in hope. Genuinely, it does. That's where you get the energy from.